Well, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Quite an interesting spread. USA on the other side of the Atlantic, and India the other way in the east. I'm going to uh, share my screen and start a PowerPoint, which will take about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we will have some discussion. Um, The reason for muting everyone is that otherwise it will disturb the recording. I'm sharing my screen, and this will be the role of women in war. Good. We start naturally enough with the Amazons, which the Greeks were very fond of displaying on vases, public uh, works, etc. They were quite sure that the Amazons were real enough. They were not mythical in any way. In fact, there are plenty of Amazons to be seen on the Elgin marbles. I suppose, even though Greek women in those times were correctly dressed, they liked a bit of derivation, so to speak. And so you see the Amazons popping up here and there. The Greeks were quite sure that they were real. They came from Scythia, which is what we call the Ukraine now. And you could probably see a little bit further up that word, what is it? And androphagai, which I got phagai means people eaters, I believe, cannibals in Russia. That's how interesting, how topical. But in fact, they were not necessarily mythical. Um, Something like 20% of the graves that have been dug up over the last 20, 30 years have had uh, women dressed in martial gear, fighting gear, and some evidence of past um, cuts and arrowheads and things like that, which suggests that they were actually real and they did actually fight. Let's move on to Dahomey, which is in the north of Nigeria. These have been recorded over some couple of hundred years. They were not simply a passing fad of the king of Dahomey. They were part of the fighting contingent of the kingdom of Dahomey. You could read the words at the bottom. I won't be reading out words that you see, but you should be able to skim your eyes over them. They were bloodthirsty indeed, and it was very remarkable. They fought the French at one time, and in fact, eventually they were defeated by the French. But the French thought they were extremely bloodthirsty and very hardened to fighting. They learned indifference to pain and death, and they executed prisoners. Their main job, actually, was to round up prisoners and sell them off to the English and the French and the Americans as slaves. And they made quite a good living capturing slaves and selling them on. Here you can see a group of them, a late Victorian photograph. Quite daunting prospect to be attacked by a group like that. You will probably learn more because about to appear on your screens or on a screen near you is this movie, which is very timely. I wonder what Hollywood will make of the Dahomey army. We shall see. I should be watching it myself. 1917, the Kerensky government, which came before the Bolshevik Revolution, recruited a women's battalion of death, 2,000 of them. They fought on the German front against the Germans. They didn't do very well. In fact, they were largely abandoned, and a great many of them were shot by the Germans as I don't know why, but there we are. They were real enough, and they actually served in 1917. Only the 1st Battalion were ever deployed to the front, and that front was the German front. Meanwhile, in England, women were beginning to be seen dressed in different clothing. I'm not quite sure whether this was a general mobilization. I suspect not, but she does have a patch on her shoulder there. I've been trying to read it and I've failed. But women were vital to Britain winning the battle. Most of the opportunities were actually in factories rather than what we've seen before. The aircraft industry relied almost entirely on women because the aircraft of those days were made with wood and with canvas. And that was a job suitable, it was thought, for women. So quite a lot of the aircraft were made entirely by women in factories in Wales, apparently. And not only aircraft, but munitions, of course. Here are the Canary Girls, so-called, not because they have a yellow sort of uniform, but because the handling of tetranitrotoluene, oh, here comes somebody, the stuff that they use, TNT, caused their hands to become stained yellow and their arms to be stained yellow, their faces to become stained yellow, and that's why they were called the Canary Girls. They were in danger not only of poisoning, which happened quite a lot, quite a few of them died of poisoning, TNT poisoning, but also of explosions. The one explosion, the big one, Silvertown explosion, killed 70 plus girls and wounded 400. There were other explosions, some of them even bigger than the Silvertown explosion. But that's what women did in order to help the war effort. Fast forward to the 1930s and the 1940s. 1942, the Rani of Jhansi's regiment was formed. Young Indian women in Burma and Malaya and the Philippines and other countries. They all came together to fight against the British. They were trained in Singapore, but abandoned Singapore and eventually found their way to Burma. They were disbanded at the end of a certain period. I don't think the fall of Rangoon was probably the last we would see of them, but they became a nursing contingent. Right, fast forward again, and here we are in World War II. World War II, just to remind you, was largely a struggle initially between Germany and the European countries. At one point, it was thought that Great Britain might be might be willing to give up, but the Dunkirk thing happened, which was possibly not quite the victory that we like to make out that it was. We left vast amounts of hardware behind when we left, and of course there were other members of the British Army and the French Army who were captured. In that event, we had 4 German battalions against us, 4 armies, and we had only half an army in London. There is some suggestion that Hitler thought that eventually we would capitulate and give up. because we were in an impossible position. But we recovered from that impossible position. And we were the lone fighters for some years against Germany. The thing to do, of course, was to start the war effort and to use women in order to provide the backup that the army needed. Soldiers were conscripted off to the war, children were evacuated. And I have some personal experience of this. I was one of the evacuees. The Pied Piper operation was actually planned sometime in 1938 because we thought that this might happen. The great fear in those days was aerial bombardment. There was very little that we could do again to save ourselves from that. It was a real potential problem. But not very much happened until September 1940. In the meantime, vast numbers of children were evacuated. These are U3A members that I've collected their stories. You will find that if you go to the website timewitnesses.org. And there are some 100 or more stories there for you to read about what happened to children in war. Some of them from Germany, from Poland, from Netherlands, Belgium, even a couple of stories from Japan, which I collected when I went to a U3A international conference to Japan. If the children, when they came back, which many of them did in September 1940, after what was called the Foley War, they had to be looked after. And of course, this was a scene that you could find quite commonly. I slept in something like this myself. I was farmed out quite a lot from September onwards. My mother had been required to join and work in a factory because my father was actually had a reserved occupation. There was no ifs and buts. My mother had to work in a factory. She didn't much like it. Young men who if they couldn't go into the forces for ill health would still be required to work in factories, but mostly it was women that did the work. My mother hated the factory. She said it was full of common girls and they used very bad language, but then that's how she felt at the time. That's me and my mother. Here's a famous ambulance driver. And of course, not only did she need to drive the ambulance, but she needed to be able to look after it. So changing wheels, carburetors, spark plugs, you name it, she had to do it. We have recently lost her, of course. All of these skills somehow made a huge difference to women and the way that they were perceived in war. Not just as factory fodder, but as people who were actively working in order to protect the United Kingdom. And they were acquiring skills that would see them used after the war as well. The auxiliary territorial service was composed of a great many women, but of course the great one were the War Office dispatch riders, who were all women, virtually all women. They drove not only motorcycles, but aircraft. And you can read the text at the bottom there, which will tell you 166 women pilots. And they came from all over the Commonwealth and other countries, the USA, the Netherlands, and Poland. One is Mary Ellis. Here we see her with her wings propped up against a Spitfire. She delivered 400 Spitfires and 47 Wellington bombers. She has a lovely story, she tells, of delivering a Wellington bomber to one airfield and getting out, being met by the group captain and standing around and saying, "Why are we standing around?" And they said, "Well, we're waiting for the pilot to get out." She said, "Well, I'm the pilot." They wouldn't believe her. And they sent somebody in to see, make sure there wasn't somebody lurking still inside the Wellington bomber. Here's another army, the Land Army, and women volunteered for the Land Army. And it was a very large army indeed. You could see what they looked like in one of their parades. They came from all over the Commonwealth, I said. Here's a group of Canadians who volunteered to serve as Wrens. But the largest number were probably the ones who set up the barrage balloons. And here they are, some training, probably 18, 19, 20, early 20s. You can see them now queuing up to get into late night Saturday night clubs in order to drink too much and have a good time. In those days, they were manning the balloons, and a very important job that was, because barrage balloons played a very effective part in preventing buzz bombs, doodle bugs we call them, doodle bugs or buzz bombs. Some of you may actually have seen a doodle bug. It's possible. It was said that if you could see one, you were probably safe, because while it made a terrible farting noise as it flew through the air, once that cut out, it would glide for 2 or 3 miles before it fell and exploded. I can remember seeing a couple of them. A lot of the stories that I'm relating to you can be found on Time Witnesses, the website I mentioned earlier. And there are a great many stories there that you will find interesting. And perhaps one or two of you might like to write up 1 or 2 stories and submit them, and they will be put on this website. There's my ration book in the corner there. Yes. I was fortunate enough to find that where I live, which is in a retirement home in Oxford, one of the frail old ladies close to me, a neighbour, was in the Special Operations Executive during the war. And she told me her story, and here it is. And on that score, in fact, I'm going to call on another neighbour of mine, because she has something to say about the Special Operations Executive. So if you would kindly unmute yourself, Sybil, and tell us something of what you said before. You're still muted. You're still muted. No, we can't hear you. It's top bottom left-hand corner, a microphone with a line through it. It's all right, we'll be patient. You'll find it eventually. I might actually, I don't think I can unmute you. No, I can ask you to unmute, but I've already done that. Bottom left-hand corner, Sybil, a red microphone with a line through it. Click on that. No, apparently we're not. So I'm going to call on comments from somebody else. Some of what I've shown actually may have been shared by others who are almost or quite as old as I am.
Tom, Shival can use a keyboard, Alt plus A.
Yes, thank you very much, Artie. Sybil, press the space bar on your laptop and keep it pressed while you speak. the space bar at the bottom. The space bar on your laptop, just press it and speak. No, we can't find it. Well, in that case, I would tell you something of Sybil's story, which is that she was originally Sybil Buckmaster. Her father, Maurice Buckmaster, was the person who organized the Special Operations Executive. Most of the women dropped into France. Most of the people dropped into France were women. And it was Maurice Buckmaster who organized that, and that is Sybil's father. With any luck, she will find the way to unmute herself and perhaps tell us a bit more. In the meantime, comments from anyone who cares to make a comment or ask a question. Any hands up?
I'll offer a comment.
Yes.
It's fascinating. What a wonderful presentation. And as some of the comments you made, the undervaluation of the role of women in war was obviously as part of the background. Hopefully, as time has progressed, more recognition is given to women in their role. And as my wife likes to say, and others that I've talked to of the female gender, if women ran the world, we wouldn't have any wars. And I think that's probably true.
Yes.
But I wonder what comments other people might have about their feelings about women in war.
Actually, I'd like to comment on what you said, Tom, because I'm well aware that the effort in the Atlantic was only possible because America made lots and lots of ships, and most of those were made by women. I had Rosie the Riveter as my heroine for many years. And I think the effort that the USA put in the final years of the war was absolutely vital. We would not have won without your help.
Yes, and that's
Sybil unmuted herself. Sybil?
You're unmuted, Donald.
I am, but I just noticed that Sybil's microphone has disappeared.
Oh,
muted.
jolly good. Sybil, can you tell us more about SOE?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My father was head of SOE France, which meant organizing agents to be dropped there and to carry out sabotage and organize things for when the Germans were going to be chased out of France. It involved sending radio messages back, so radio operators were dropped. And overall, there were probably almost as many women as men who got dropped. And a lot of the tales of heroism concerned women, and many of the women were imprisoned or deported. Quite a few of them lost their lives, a lot in heroic circumstances. But it's without the help of women, they certainly wouldn't have had the success that they did have, and wouldn't have earned the accolades which came from every side. There was a woman in particular called Vera Atkins, who was my father's intelligence officer. And after the war, she spent a lot of time in Nuremberg helping get women who had been imprisoned out of prison, reinstated in their countries, and in many cases giving them credit for what they had done.
Very good. Thank you very much, Sybil. We're very pleased to have you amongst us. Any more comments, please?
For those of us who live in the UK, I recently watched a BBC 4 programme on SOE about how they were recruited, trained and then operated, which is absolutely amazing. And I believe it's probably still available on BBC iPlayer, and well worth a watch because the role they played was absolutely fantastic and the bravery they showed was absolutely outstanding and amazing. And certainly not something I could do.
I don't
If
know if,
anybody's interested, there are 4 or 5 histories which have been written, and one of the best is by Michael Foote, MRD Foote, and it was, oh, I think it's just called The Official History, but there is another book called A Life in Secrets, which is the story of Vera Atkins, whom I mentioned just now. And there are several books which deal with different regions in France. One of the Loire Valley by René Jonquin. If anybody's interested, I can give you details of other books.
Good, thank you very much, Sybil. Comments or questions, please?
question on the SOE, was the SOE strictly the operational on the ground activities, or does it include the intelligence forces, which there have been a number of movies in the US at least about women in the intelligence branch and breaking the codes and so forth?
Yes, I believe, in fact, large numbers of women were employed at the headquarters at Bletchley Park, sorting out the codes and transcribing them and passing them to be understood.
In the US, I might just remark in the US, more recently, there's been a lot of recognition given to the women that perform similar functions in the US that have gone unrecognized since World War II.
Yes. Yes, it seems that women are suddenly getting the accolades that they deserve. It's taken a long time.
Yeah, I think this is right across the board as well, isn't it? Certainly in the 18th and 19th centuries, and indeed the early 20th centuries, the role of women was definitely underplayed. Lots of men took credit for women's role and work. Only latterly are these important contributions actually being recognised.
Yes, indeed. Moira, if you're there, your webcam is not operating at the moment. You're in Paris, and I know that you are in touch with quite a few elderly people there. Is any of what you've seen so far new to you, or were you familiar with it? Probably gone for a coffee break. Well, I'm going to close now since there are no more comments.
Just a brief one, if I might, Tom.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
thank you very much. It's been very interesting. We shouldn't also forget that there were large numbers of women who suffered in the Holocaust during the Second World War, and indeed a large number, I'm sure, of German women who suffered during the Second World War, and probably their stories have yet to be told.
Yes, in fact, one of the stories can be seen on BBC iPlayer, and it's called Berlin 1945.
Yeah.
And it is an extremely harrowing
Yeah.
tale of what happened when the Russian forces occupied Berlin. John Court had his hand up.
Yeah, just about 3 comments. One, the group of people that are roughly called Vikings, all the women were expected to bear arms in order to defend the homestead if the men were away. The women also went on raiding parties, but the exact function in those raiding parties isn't known.
Right.
On the women, if women ruled the world bit, women are humans, just like men. And there are a range of women, and if you look at history, you'll find that women have been as violent in history as they have at any time. And any supposition that women are naturally peaceful, I think is a falsehood. And finally, if you have access to BBC 4 podcasts, then look or listen to a series that's just come on called Princess. They go through a number of women through history, There are a couple of rather frippery programs in amongst it, but they go through women in history who were anything but peaceful.
All right, that's very interesting. I have to admit that at one time I believed that men and women were equal. I no longer believe that. I think women are infinitely superior.
Indeed.
Miles James.
Yes, somewhat more banal, I'm afraid. I had several cousins who served in the war. My maternal grandparents had, I think, some 20 grandchildren, of which I'm one of the youngest. And one of my cousins served in the Wrens. And we discovered after the war that she sent the signal that sent another cousin, a commando, ashore on Walcheren Island in the Netherlands.
Amazing, amazing. And Long, you have
Yeah, I'm just going to mention the Iceni tribe and Boudica, or however you want to sort of call her, because she was very important, obviously, here in Colchester.
Yes, indeed.
And just a silly aside, my mum actually saw the war as a bonus. She was in service in Northern Ireland and she escaped to the Wrens and became a completely different person. Silly. I think she enjoyed the parties on board the ship more than anything else. She was officially a minesweeper, but I never heard anything about that.
Right.
It was just, she'd escaped. She was free. She could do what she liked.
Yes, good story. Thank you, lovely. Ian Munro.
I hesitate with ladies present, but if I could lower the tone and repeat what I was told by someone who was in the Navy, it was up with a lark and to bed with a wren. Apologies.
I regret that I didn't hear that, Ian. Any more comments? Any more questions for Sama?
I think Aarti raised first Tom.
Right. I can't see Artie. Where is she? Oh, yes, Artie. I see her.
Yes, Tom.
Artie?
I want to tell something regarding, you said na Tom, women are far superior. I want to add that Sir William Golding have told regarding women as, I think women are foolish to pretend they are equal to men. They are far superior and always have been. Whatever you give a woman, she will make it greater. If you give her a sperm, she will give you a baby. If you give her a house, she will give you a home. If you give her a glossaries, she will give you a meal. If you give her a smile, she will give you her heart. She multiplies and enlarges what is given to her.
Okay. Thank you, Artie. I agree with you. We're very, I won't say any more. I sometimes pull my students' legs saying they have to buy their husbands first and then they'll submit to slavery for the rest of their lives. But that's a different matter.
I thought when we had to buy a marriage license, men said it was 7 and 6 down and pay for the rest of your life.
Yes, that's true. Prasanna, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Like from the 19th century, women were aware and women are coming out and they're using their opportunities and they are working equally like men. Before 19th century, women were like at home, not doing. Only few of them were coming out and proving their worth. And but nowadays, when they got the opportunity to work in war, they got. Initially, we should not ever compare the women and men. Only in developed countries, only women are coming out and doing everything, they will get a respect, like equal respect come with men in developed countries. In if you compare in other countries, it is not same as US or UK. Women should struggle to come out, and also they should bear the society, means they have to come out, and they should prove that they should make opportunity. Society will never treat them as equal as men.
Good.
And
Even in India, that is true. Yes. In fact, one might say that biologically speaking, men are an aberration. They don't have the double X chromosome, which is the normal arrangement for Homo sapiens. Their proper function, biologically speaking, is to impregnate females and look after them while they have their babies and produce their babies. Then they can go off and play with their guns and things, which is what they do. Generally speaking, I think we have reached a point where we will close down. It's 39 minutes past the hour. And thank you all for your comments. Tom, no more comments, no more questions. Thank you very much indeed. I'm closing this group and thank you for attending. Goodbye to everyone. Goodbye.
Bye bye.